All right, let's get started. So thank you very much for tuning in. This is our fifth masterclass for the Queen Strength Summer Digital Series. This is our Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We've been doing this every week now. So hopefully everybody's doing well. Hopefully everybody's safe. Hopefully everybody's training has gone well. And today we're going to talk about agility and how do we train it. I think this is a very, very interesting topic. I think the way that this topic is usually presented is kind of a singular focus, and it's all just about footwork or fast feet and so on and so forth, but it doesn't take into account the actual game demand. So I think this will be a really good presentation for you. I think you'll enjoy it. Also, what you're going to notice, there's going to be some videos in this. So if you aren't able to really view the video in real time, if it doesn't work that well for you, because I know sometimes it can be a problem over Zoom, by all means, feel free to shoot us an email or get in touch with us and we can make sure you get the presentation as well. But let's get into it. So what is agility and how do we train it? So just a quick reminder of why we are doing these series. The whole point of this is to try to explain the why behind what we do. So not only for the athletes that we work with and the future athletes that we work with, but for other coaches that are interested in the strength and conditioning field, as well as athletes just across the world that are interested in how to get better and how to take their game to the next level. So that's kind of why we try to explain what we're explaining. So real quick, the most important thing we need to think about is creating the differentiation here between what change of direction is and what agility is. I think when coaches and trainers and people think about agility, they're generally talking about change of direction. So what is change of direction? Change of direction is simply an unstimulated and a very simple approach to putting force into the ground and decelerating and then turning over and reaccelerating in opposite direction. Most drills that are chosen for this have no perceptual or cognitive involvement whatsoever. It is simply run to a cone or go into an agility ladder and perform the task, turn to your left, turn to your right, go around the cone and come on back. So this is a great example of what we would call a square drill or four cone drill. Once again, it might be tough to see if you can't see the video as well, but pretty simple, 5 yards forward, 5 yards to the side, 5 yards back. By all means, we use those. Those are great drills for us. There's something that is at the basic forefront of what we do, but this is a change of direction drill. The athlete doesn't have to make up their mind on anything. They don't have to make decisions. They don't have to read another person. It is a very simple, basic change of direction drill. So other variations of this are things like agility ladders. Now, there's a big debate in the strength and conditioning community about the usefulness of agility ladders, and let's be honest, they're not going to make you juke an athlete. They're not going to be able to allow you to create space. They're really not going to carry over much to the game. But I do think there are some usefulness to them, meaning they're a great way to warm up. They're a great way to teach mild deceleration and actual changes of direction. They're a great way to force some proprioception, and the athlete has to have the ability to choose where their body is going to be in space. But they're not reacting to anything. It doesn't look like the sport or anything whatsoever. So we don't call them speed ladders. The key here is that they are really just basic change of direction tools that we can use. And they also are very good for return to play. So we can put some of our athletes who are coming off of ankle or knee surgeries, and we can put them into something like this to try to get their heart rate up and get them moving a little bit. These are just examples of other common cone drills. So like a 5-10-5 pro agility, a shuttle drill, or different straight line drills. But the goal here is like there is a simple destination for you to get to. You need to lower your center of mass, widen your base of support, simply turn around and go back in the other direction. All of it being pre-planned, all of it being pretty rudimentary. So what is change of direction in comparison to agility? So this is where I think a lot of the field kind of loses it. Agility has this perceptual cognitive component. And here's a great example. This is just a video that we use in some of our lectures. It's called The Sickest Juke Ever. These are just kids, probably haven't had much formal training, but if you watch this little boy, he's able to really plant into the ground, read the body language and read the momentum of other athletes, and he just trips them up over and over and over again. So I know that might be tough for you to see because the video is not great, but once again, the whole point here is he has to react to some sort of stimulus, in this case, another athlete. If it was tennis, it would likely be the other athlete or the ball or the racket. And he has to read that individual and then try to create some deception and move around them. So agility is really important for us that we understand that there's a perceptual cognitive component to agility. So let me take this one step further. Agility is sport specific. Once again, I gave the example of tennis. So here's a really interesting thing about baseball players, and it's something along the lines, I believe, I'm going to get the exact quote wrong on this, but basically baseball players have like in the 95th percentile of vision in the world. So in mainly positional baseball players, not necessarily pitchers. And I don't always remember if it's like 2010 or 1020 is a good vision, but regardless of whatever order it's in, their level of vision allows them to have such a high sense of visual acuity that they can see what's happening in the ball and they can see what's happening in the pitcher's hand better than the average person can. So they can react and make a decision about how they kind of maneuver their body to create the desired outcome. Same thing goes for agility. Having good visual and cognitive awareness is really, really important to see how the ball is going to come off of the racket, or to see the athlete's position or the open face or closed face of the racket. And in case of basketball, we're having to read the athletes in front of us, beside us, behind us, to make sure that we can create the decision to also span the floor to determine if we need to pass or shoot. So agility is very sport specific, and it's going to look very different in soccer than it is going to look in MMA. But nobody's going to argue the fact that agility is going to be critically important, whether you're sprawling to defend a takedown or you're trying to get around a defender to get a clear shot at the net. So agility needs to look sport specific, but a 3-cone drill or a T-test or a 4-cone drill is not going to be suitable for every athlete of all these different sports to get the desired outcome that we're looking for. There's no specificity, and there's no having to react to any other stimulus. So once again, if you look at these extreme angles in some of these basketball players that they get from decelerating and loading through the foot, ankle, through the hip complex, and having to strain on the other side to push off and go in another direction while still handling, it is quite a dynamic movement pattern that an agility ladder is really, truly not going to help you with. So agility and change of direction. What are our training goals here? And there's 3 primary goals that we need to look at when we're thinking agility, okay? And not change of direction, but actually agility. We have to have an enhanced perceptual cognitive ability in various situation and tactical scenarios. So we have to be able to visually read what we're trying to lose or create space on. And the whole goal here is to try to make a decision as to where we want to go. So we also have to have the physical qualities of effective and rapid breaking of one's momentum. So how do we do that? We have good lower body strength. We have good eccentric strength of our muscle being able to absorb force. And then thirdly, we have rapid acceleration towards the next or the new direction of travel. So we have to have, in most cases, a short ground contact time to be able to absorb that force eccentrically, which we talked about in our plyometrics lecture last week, to be able to turn that around to make a concentric contraction in the opposite direction. So the last 2 are very physical things that we can train almost in the weight room, or we can train through different drills and whatnot. But the first one is going to be developing an athlete's toolbox by exposing them to a variety of different scenarios to try to build their perceptual cognitive ability to be able to react on the fly, to be able to be in a situation and go, hey, I've somewhat been in this situation before where I have somebody chasing me that I need to get away from, and so on and so forth. So we need to make sure that we are exposing them to a variety of different scenarios. So how do we change the direction? And how do we, this is basic, just the physiology of what we're looking at for change of direction. Well, we need to improve eccentric loading. Once again, I just gave you the example of stretching the muscle tissue under tension. So these are things like slower tempos in our squats. This could even be using different deceleration drills at faster tempo. So running to a line and then stopping and learning how to hit the brakes. Those eccentric loadings, whether heavy and slow or fast and quick, are both very vital to improving the overall capacities of the athlete. Landing drills, these are usually more vertical output, so stepping off of a box or whatnot, learning to absorb and then being able to turn that over. Single leg strength is critically important. Very rarely do we decelerate in 2 legs. Even our volleyball players, when they come out of a spike jump or spike approach, they're going to land on 1 leg most of the time. So they need to have that stability and that single leg strength to be able to absorb that force and then reproduce into any position they want to get into. Key here is slower technique work. We know that through all the research into motor learning, that motor learning happens at slower paces, and we have to slowly think about progressing the speed in which we teach things. That's why an agility ladder might be a great place to start teaching very young athletes how to coordinate their body, how to maintain posture, how to have quicker ground contact times, and so on and so forth. But as we progress through things, we need to start picking up the pace and adding more complexity to it. And then relative strength. So this is just a really simple approach. If I weigh more, I could be the exact same strength But if I have a higher body composition and I weigh more, I'm going to have to move more mass. I'm going to have to decelerate that mass and then turn that over and create force in the opposite direction. Well, if I just improve my relative strength, so how strong am I pound for pound, so I end up being relatively leaner, then I'm going to be able to produce a quicker change of direction. So long gone are the days of, even in football and in rugby, where your tight five or your offensive line are just very large individuals with high levels of absolute strength. The game is so fast that the number of changes of direction and the pure reliance on agility and footwork has gone up so much that we have to have a better relative strength. So you're seeing much leaner athletes in those positions. You might argue that sumo wrestling or something along those lines would be different, but in regards to team sport, we're thinking that relative strength is going to be a major component for us. So we can do this simply by testing our athletes in their 1RMs on a split squat, on a bench press, on a weighted chin up, on a deadlift, whatever it might be, and then dividing their body weight into that. And you can come up with relative strength scores to try to determine where our athletes are at. So that's a great way that as athletes learn technique on major lifts, that we can make sure that we're improving the relative body strength. But at the same time, we can also take body composition and things along those lines if that's appropriate for your scenario. So how do we think about progressing here? Well, we're going to start with what we call planned change of direction drills. So these are very simple 4-cone drills. In the video I previously showed you, agility ladder drills. These are very, very simple things. And then we're going to add in what we call reactive change of direction drills. So these might be responsive to somebody like myself, where I might be telling them a direction to go, pointing both visually or audible, a signal that I could tell them left, right, back, forward, those kinds of things. Forcing them to react, but still maybe going to like a specific cone. Go to here, decelerate, I'll tell you where to go. But then you also have agility drills. Now, agility drills are where you're going to add in another component where they're going to have to read an opponent. So this is a much more game-like and game scenario, which is really, really important. So I've even read some stuff on basketball that shows while practicing three-point shooting, for example, people do better in game when they practice three-point shooting with the defender, rather than just throwing up shots with no defender, because when they're in that situation, they need to understand the pressure that applies to that. They're going to have to read another person's body language, is about how high to put the arc on the shot. So agility really comes down to, and in-game performance comes down to your ability to read your opponents and find space. So simple deceleration drill. This is not too complicated here. I'll fast forward through this a little bit, but this is basically teaching athletes how to hit the brakes. Can they lower their center of gravity? Can they accelerate from those positions? But one thing we teach pretty early on is just the ability of an athlete to accelerate and then quickly hit the brakes, and teaching their body to utilize that eccentric strength before we really are concerned about accelerating out of that. So one thing we do with our athletes is we'll do like a 10-yard acceleration, and then you have to stop on the line. A 15-yard acceleration, you're going to get a little bit quicker. You got to stop on the line. And teaching athletes how to widen their base of support. One of the other drills we're doing, and we actually just did it in our previous phase, is what we call an agility, a 4-cone agility drill, where we basically have the athletes sprint and accelerate forward, and then they have to decelerate on that cone in a lunge position that they would find themselves in on the field. When I say go, they have to push laterally and then move to the left and then go run to the next cone, decelerate, lower their center of gravity, and then push back at a 90-degree angle and go to the third cone and the fourth cone and so on. So it's all done to a pause, teaching athletes how to truly decelerate. So that's an important component for us. So let me just move this forward. Another way to develop single leg strength. This is just a very strong individual doing a hand supported split squat. But basically, this is what's called a safety squat bar. I would never do this with young athletes. And to be honest, we don't do this with many of our current athletes that we have. But you're developing a lot of strength on one leg to be able to drive force into the ground. We know that's important eccentrically, so controlling this on the way down. And it's also going to be important concentrically to try to produce strength and force into the opposite direction. So really, really important that we do this on single leg work, because this is something that they're going to find themselves doing in the game. Not necessarily with 300 pounds on their back, but. So that brings me to this concept of how do we progress this, and how do we kind of think about the bigger picture of things. And people smarter than me came up with this concept of what's known as the OODA loop. So this is, OODA loop is used in how to make decisions. So I believe this was used more in the military initially, if I recall correctly, but this is something that when we talk about agility training versus change of direction training, which can be critically important for us. And the 4 stages are observe, orient, decide, and act. So let's start with observe. So observe is basically like an athlete needs to be able to see what is in front of them they need to be able to take all of that information in. So the baseball pitcher needs to be able to be looking at the pitcher to see what's going on. They also need to look at if there's a shift going on in the field and so on and so forth. In soccer, you're going to need to understand what sort of defense are they playing. Do they have 3 defenders? Do they have 4 defenders? Do they have a center back and so on? But the whole goal is to observe and detect what's going on around you. And this is where like people are going to make these decisions quicker if they have more experience. So putting athletes in the or giving them the opportunity to create a toolbox of situations that they've been in is critically important. And this is why they talk about in long-term athlete development that athletes should play a variety of sports until they reach a particular age where specialization makes more sense. And the main reason being is they need to see and have exposure to what it looks like for somebody to have a ball tucked in their hand, or to look at what it looks like from an ankle position when they're trying to change direction laterally versus a 45-degree angle. You're basically creating a reservoir or like a list of things in your head that you can recall on during these moments. So then we need to make sure we're orienting. So additional focus on your observation. So you're obviously, we go back to making sure we're spanning the environment, but now we're starting to make judgments and assumptions based on what we see. So in this position here, you might notice that the Cincinnati guard has his left foot slightly forward. So it might make more sense to me to try to go to my right hand if I can, or to fake left, make him commit more and then go right again. So you're starting to take that information that you observed and you're starting to orient the game plan as to what context and what outcome you want to provide here. And then we're looking to decide, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're using our previous experience and the intel that's in front of us to select a desired movement pattern that we're going to achieve a desired outcome. So it might be, once again, like the previous example, I might fake inside to then go outside. I might, in this case with volleyball players, I see the position of my setter's hands and the previous play that we've ran to understand that I might want to do this to make sure I'm in this position for the desired outcome and so on and so forth. Those require very quick turnovers. You're obviously not making a very, you're not really engaged in that decision making. That is something that happens through a feedback loop. But because it happens so fast, that just reinforces our understanding that this needs to happen more frequently, and this needs to happen in a variety of scenarios for athletes at younger ages, so they develop the ability to make these decisions quickly. And then they need to act. So this is where they're going to execute on their decision. Okay, this is the decision I'm making. This is the area in which I'm going to go. And then this will kind of close that OODA loop to then hopefully just receive a desired outcome. But here's what's great about this. If you act and it doesn't work appropriately and you don't get your desired outcome, then you've created a memory to now learn, maybe I don't do that and I don't put myself in that situation. So when an athlete's feet are staggered in that direction, maybe I need to pay a little bit more attention to that foot placement. Is the toe more externally rotated? So therefore, if I see that, then maybe it is my best bet to move to the left rather than to the right. So we're constantly learning through this OODA loop. Well, now let's take that and now let's put this into more practice. So that is kind of the governing decision-making, right? Observe, orient, decisions, and then act. So that's critically important for us. But then what we're going to do is we're going to take that and go, okay, now how do I put my athletes in environments that are going to challenge them? I'm not going to really dive into agility ladder footwork. I'm not going to dive into cone drills because I think there's so much of that on the internet and in textbooks and so on that you can find. But what I'll dive into is something that the people at Elon Performance and Elon University, as well as people like Nick DeMarco and Keir Wetham-Flatt, and these individuals have come up with these, or another one being Cam Joss and Fergus Connolly, have come up with these kind of, talked a lot about these 5 situations that you're going to be able to train your athletes in. And we've used these in some aspect every year of our training. It just depends how they kind of fit into these buckets. But I'll show you a few different examples of how we kind of progress through things. So usually a mirror drill is a great way to introduce some partner agility work. So I'll walk you through some of these. So a simple mirror drill here. This is done on one of our basketball courts. This is what we call a rabbit drill. So what our goal here is that we're facing each other. This is a lateral drill. He's trying to mirror whatever behavior that I'm doing, forward, backwards, down, karaoke. So this is more of an advanced one that we'll throw in a variety of scenarios, but his job is to try to close the distance on me as best as he possibly can. So this is a simple task of a 1v1 mirror drill where one athlete is mimicking one athlete. Well, there could be 2v1, so 2 athletes have to mimic one athlete. You can throw an athlete in the middle whose job is just to distract you and try to get in front of your vision so that basically the athlete makes it harder to read the other person. You can do it just laterally. You can do it linearly. You can do it within 3 dimensions. But the whole goal here is to mirror one another. So that's a very, very useful drill with lots of progressions off of that. In addition to that, we're going to talk about score drill. So here's a great example from Elon where they talk about a score drill, which is basically now you have an end zone to get to. You have a place that you're trying to basically complete your drill. And when you get there, you know that your drill is now over. So this is a 2v2 box score where 2 athletes are on the offensive, 2 athletes are on the defensive. One athlete on the offense's job is to try to create distraction and try to create almost like a physical barrier that allows the other person to make decisions to get around. The bigger that this box is, the easier it's going to be for the offense, the harder it's going to be for the defense. So it kind of depends on what you're focusing on training. You can do this on 1v1. You can do this on a very small, narrow, long box. You can do this on a very large box. You can add multiple more athletes into it. There's so many variations of scoring drills. You can even throw a ball into this. But the whole goal here is trying to get to the other side. So I'll show you this quick video, only 5 seconds long. Can we create distraction and try to get to the other side? And I always encourage that we only use light tagging just to make sure that nobody's getting injured. And ideally for our court sports, we might do this inside, but for our field sports, we would do this outside. Okay, let me take it one step further. We're gonna go into our dodge drills. Here's another great example of what a dodge drill would be. This is more or less, you're gonna see offense trying to create space, defense trying to narrow space. So basically run into a line, and the goal here is one athlete is going to pick what direction and what gap they want to fill. And it's up to the other athlete to try to see that quickly and then create a movement into the open space. So we just were actually on a call here not too long ago with the strength and conditioning coach from the Leicester Tigers out in England for rugby. And he was just talking about the simple concepts of taking space and making space, where taking space is a little bit more along the lines of basically, can you accelerate through and can you just use your speed to continue on to take as much open space as possible, versus making space and being able to read and have a little bit more of the perceptual cognitive development to lower that center of gravity, see what positions athletes are filling, therefore what spaces that allow you to make that is open. And this is just a simple 1v1 with 2 open spaces where an individual is going to clog one of those spaces. I could use multiple people here. I could use a variety of different spaces and openings that I could use, as well as I could start them backwards. I could start them on an angle. I could start them curling in. The faster I start at, the more difficult it becomes. So the goal here is, can you quickly read and dodge? Obviously, you risk some collision here, but you just need to make sure that athletes are aware of what's happening in the task, and they have to very much be intentful with what they're doing, right? So then next prescription here is what we call chaser drills. We do this a lot in our sprinting. So a lot of our sprints are always going to finish with some sort of competition sprint. When we're talking competition sprint, we could talk linear, a lateral start, we could talk around a curve, whatever it might be, but our goal is to chase one another linearly. Well, we can also take that laterally. We can also take that within a box formation here, where the goal is going to be the offense to create space and the defense to narrow space. I'm not trying to mimic their movements. I'm just simply trying to close space if I'm on the defense. So here's a great example of what a box chaser drill is. Within that box, I'm just trying to create space. This individual is trying to narrow the gap on me no matter what position I move into. And we can do a variety of different chaser drills with a variety of different athletes and trying to create deception on the offense to try to create space. So finally, let's take this one step further. And then when we do this on the level of a larger team group, we might dive into something known as smaller sided games. So this is something that I've honestly struggled with at times, because when working with a coaching staff, you need to make sure that people adequately understand that there's a risk associated anytime you play a game. If you're working with a football team and you want to play like some touch football, there's a likelihood that people still might get hurt. If you're looking to do, we did this one year where we played ultimate frisbee as a small-sided game to try to just work on agility as well as some basic fundamental athleticism with some of our football players, and one of our athletes pulled their hamstring. Well, unfortunately, that's just the nature with training, that occasionally these things may happen. I don't necessarily think it was because we were playing ultimate frisbee that occurred, but the idea here is anytime you pick a small-sided game, there's going to be some competitive natures to it. So the smaller that you go, the less likely that they're going to accelerate to very high speeds, but the less athletes you're going to be wanting to use in that small-sided game. The other side is that the larger that you go with your small-sided games, you're going to likely have more of an aerobic component. There's going to be much more running, much more room for acceleration. Heart rates will likely get a lot higher. There's more places to also hide in that too. So you got to make sure that you're keeping people engaged. So I'm not going to dive into specifics here. People can do, obviously they can do small-sided games within their sport. They can even add multiple balls into it. I showed here some of our female athletes that have done powder puff before, or touch football or flag football. That's another option that removes the opportunity to make a tackle or people to run into one another. But there's so many different variations of small-sided games, but you can use this as your conditioning the closer you get to training camps. Once again, taking general over to specific, that the further we go throughout the season, tasks should look more specific to the game. Well, the most specific way to look like you're playing football is to play football. So I think that's a huge component to start putting them in similar games that they have to make similar decisions to read different body languages. That is going to give you more bang for your buck than any agility ladder is going to give you. So we might use agility ladders in warm-ups periodically, but we're never using them when we're out on field sessions and we're out with larger team groups because they don't really provide any bang for our buck. So let's go to a quick summary here. And feel free, if you want to ask any questions, I'm just going to summarize stuff and kind of get started for the next week and kind of set things up for next week. But if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat right now. And I'll take a look at those. If not, then what I'll do is I'll just kind of wrap things up at the end. But in summary here, we have to understand that there's going to have to be a progression from general to specific. I'm not trying to bash cone drills and agility ladders. Those things have a place, but I don't think we should be spending more than 2% of our time on those. Those are simple warm-up movement patterns that for us, once again, in youth athletes or return to play athletes, it's a different story. But with the athletes that we work with that are a little bit older, and later in the season, we want to make sure we're looking at things that are a little bit more sport specific or actually a more agility type training for us. Secondly, is the majority of training should implement some sort of perceptual cognitive development and component. So we need to add reaction into it. People need to develop some sort of competition with it. They need to be reading one another. Your goal here is to develop a database of as many movement patterns and solutions as possible. And when we look at athlete development, there's the physical, there's the technical, there's the tactical, and there's the psychological or mental. Well, from the physical side is like, we can just do physical stuff and we can just stay in the weight room. We can work on eccentric strength, single leg strength. We can work on deceleration and linear sprint mechanics. We can do all that. But if we never tap into the cognitive, which is occurring in the technical and the tactical components, we're not helping our athletes kind of mesh all these components together. It's really critical that athletes learn to make decisions, and they're put in and they're given opportunities to fail so that they can learn these movement patterns and have this database. The best athletes sometimes lack physical abilities, which is great from a strength and conditioning standpoint because we can build those, but they tend to have maximized all of these technical and tactical development opportunities that they've had. So they've likely played multiple sports in their life. They likely have created this database of all these movement patterns that they can rely on when they need it. And then finally here, these are just great examples. Use mirror, dodge, score, dodge, chaser, and small-sided games for your team sport athletes. So once again, key resources here. Once again, you can always feel free to reach out to us. We can answer more questions for you. But Elon Performance, the staff there at Elon University does a great job with this. Cam Joss and Fergus Connolly have done some great work in this area. Sophia Nymphius from, she's at a university, why am I drawing a blank on this? But she's from Edith Cowan University out in Australia, in New Zealand area. So she's one of the world's leading researchers on agility training. Once again, one thing I think I should dive into is that just because you have flashing lights that also give some sort of perceptual cognitive element, it's still not down that pathway of having to read another individual. So those might serve a purpose. They're likely better than agility ladders to create more desired and intentful movement, but they don't really fill the buckets of pure agility training that we're looking for. So then join us next week. Next week, I actually prefaced this last week thinking that this week was the agility seminar, or the squatting seminar, so my apologies. But next week we will be discussing squatting, and our summer student, Zach Dara, will be taking over that master class for us then. So real quick, I'll make sure I stop sharing my screen here. And if there's any questions from anybody, by all means, feel free to reach out. But if not, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And we will talk to everybody soon. Great. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.